Hey, I'm Jacob Cooperman, and you were watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with Todd Atkins and Miguel Iturrate. Todd has been involved in covering combat sports since the 1990s, and Miguel has match-made over 200 different events amongst various promotions worldwide. Please subscribe and be on the lookout for future episodes. As for me, you can check me out at Gloves Up on YouTube and Coop TV with 3 O's on Instagram. Thank you guys, and enjoy the episode.
All right, so it's Todd Atkins. I'm back with Miguel Iturrate, MMA Conspiracy Hour. And what's interesting is we've done a video like this before. Last time UFC had a fight fixing allegations. And here we are again with a new fight, this past event. Isaac Dulgarian versus Yadier Del Valle. And looks like something similar could have happened. And I just want to let Miguel jump right into it because I had him watch a few videos on it and kind of give his opinion on what he thinks so far.
Yeah, I saw the end of the fight. I saw a couple of videos out there, including one by a guy named Fight Society. That
Yeah,
it doesn't look like it's a major website, but I think he did a good job
yeah,
describing it. The the faces and grimaces on the guy in the choke don't really square up with the uh the actual position that you're in. It does look like he's selling the fight to me. It is a problem. And then, again, Fight Society is where I got some of the information from. So kudos to him. Um, but then there are ties back to James Krause and the old allegations here. So again, the lifetime ban and this type of thing doesn't really, it seems to be also um smoke and mirrors. He's banned, but obviously, all his fighters went to his old trainer's gym, and obviously there's going to be some geography involved. I mean, if you live in a town, how many trainers are there going to be of that level? So yeah, there's the ties you could say it's just coincidence, but you can also look at it with a suspicious eye. I think gambling is a problem. I've seen, I personally never really gambled on the sport. I was asked to be a line maker for Bodog I did it for about a year. I can really only say who I think is going to win in a fight, or not. So they moved on and think they hired uh not Nick Polikas. Who's the other well-known bookkeeper from the old days?
the Greek.
No, no, his he was kind of a rival. His name will come to me in a minute. But the point is they moved on to a guy who was a pro who kind of knew this stuff. And there's a numbers component to gambling that I have to admit that if I were a gambler, I'd be a casual gambler. But there's a numbers component and a mathematical component to this that the real pros understand, and that's who they moved on to. I'm gonna look up here his names just so that we can get him.
I want to see the other gym that they moved to because at least Summit, Missouri, which is where Krause's gym was, that's not a big city, really. It's about 100, just over 100,000 people. You know, I
Joey
would.
Odessa.
Oh yeah, Joey. How could I forget Joey?
Yeah, so Joey Odessa. I mean, there was a time where it was Odessa and Nick Kalikas were the two. Odessa was kind of more of a little bit of a player, whereas Nick Kalikas was more of a straight shooter kind of guy. I did an odd show with Nick Kalikas that I think is still out there that Nick still does. Nick lived in Costa Rica and then moved back to the United States when he had a kid. He wanted to raise his kid up there. Um, so I've been around the gambling end of this for a long time, and I see the way these guys do it. And there is a component. Like I remember, for example, Joey Odessa and Phil Baroni, who was an MMA fighter, and Baroni was a gambler. And Baroni unfortunately has gone down a different path and is in a Mexican jail right now. But that gives you a good idea of what goes on in these circles. Is that you've got people that feel like they're on the inside, and um, that inevitably uh, can escalate real quick, real fast, and become a problem. And so I'm not surprised that this has come up. This comes up on the hands of the NBA scandal, which I think the NBA is really fearful because I mean they arrested a head coach of one of the teams as well as a couple of active players.
Yeah, Chauncey
Um,
Billups, great player, great
right, right.
college
I mean,
and the NFL player. Yeah,
NBA, but
yeah,
yeah, I mean, he was the guy who won a championship, and when you define NBA careers, guys that win championships are held on a little bit of a different pedestal.
yeah. He
Also,
was called Mr. Big Shot. He was the guy that they would go to if they needed a basket.
and and
Yeah,
and yeah, and with
Detroit
that
Pistons.
comes, the NBA too is a different level of money of the UFC. Chauncey should really be financially okay, and even $100,000 transactions, even $1 million, should be something that he doesn't need to make. He shouldn't need to make $1 million. Like I mean, Michael Jordan. Yeah, I know he's not on Michael's level in terms of money or Magic Johnson or those guys, but I mean, he should be probably worth $50 million. So $1 million is something that might interest him if it was a legitimate business or anything like that. But something shady, he should be able to look the other way. But there's a little bit of a buddy system. There's a little bit of a you scratch my back and we're cool and insiders and this, that, the other thing that goes on there. And I'm not sure of all the intricacies of the NBA stuff, but um, in MMA you can see guys in boxing. We won't. This scandal hasn't hit boxing yet. I guess it has if you consider Kinahan's involvement and big players like that in in uh in boxing. But this goes back 200 years in boxing. Boxing, the first documentation of boxing that we have is from the 1680s. It comes from a British crime journal, and boxing was normally documented as public disturbances. So guys got together to fight in, the courtyard or the square of the town or whatever, and the cops would break it up as a public disturbance. And you've got in the 1680s, you're talking about society starting to change from armored knights more to unarmed people in cities and things like that. So society started to change, and duels and fighting was became more of unarmed. But before that, I guess they happened with swords and clubs or whatever. Um, James Figg, the first British champion in the 1720s, the first documented champion, actually had a boxing academy where they also taught cudgel fighting and sword fighting and things like that. So it emerged as society changed over where a certain portion of men in cities and towns no longer had to be armed all the time, or at least, also you have the emergence of firearms, which that type of dueling also happened, where you take 10 steps and turn around and shoot each other and that sort of stuff. It's also well documented. But the boxing was a um, public disturbance in the original uh, news items where you start to find it in the line of history. But what became interesting there was Britain is a society of lords, and in England, one of the lords, and I've got a book, and I don't want to get the names wrong, but just say one of the aristocracy in Britain who could order the police to not bother him, and they could not enter his estate and stuff like that. It's documented. His name is documented. The two fighters are the butcher and the meat man, or the butcher and the shoemaker, rather. So the fighters don't even get known to history, but the interest of the guy with the Lord is there, and the Lord would put up, 5 or 10 pounds and have his butcher and his shoemaker fight for his entertainment. And that becomes the aristocracy betting against each other. Yeah, him and his friends became interested, and they would make money bets that, uh, you know, transcended anything that the boxers made, which is exactly, almost more than 400 or close to 400 years, or whatever the time frame is, several centuries later, it's exactly where we are now. The businessmen and the aristocracy of the sport, Dana White, i.e., makes a lot more money than any of the fighters. Dana's worth a lot more than even Tyson Fury or the top paid boxers in the world. And the top paid boxers in the world are worth a lot more. Dana's worth more than Floyd Mayweather ever was. Right? So it's always going to be a rich man's game. Eventually, again, there's documentation. Fighters at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, where this was still a very rugged sport, where you were in a situation where, you know, up until 1910, 1911, you still had 45 round fights. Before that, there were 75 round fights. Guys like Joe Gans fought 75 round championship fights. And making $10,000 in those days is the equivalent of making, $500,000 now or whatever. So the boxers were considered to be well compensated, but the betting that went around it was clearly a lot more money, and was counted. The newspapers in those days would give odds on the fight, 7-5, 3-3, whatever it was. It later emerged the plus 100, minus 100 system that we have now. Some books still do, the 7-5 odds and things like that. Again, there's a mathematical component to, like, it depends on where, if you have an instinct for this stuff, you sometimes see a money line and you see value immediately. And that's what goes on there. So at the turn of the century, there would actually be people who would be at the fights, armed, with security, with people, and they would hold the money for the bets. The fighters would bet on themselves. Obviously, you didn't have a situation back then where they would bet against themselves. Or maybe you did in some cases. There are some fights in history that were crooked that have never been identified. I'm sure that that's happened, But in general, what was documented at the turn of the last century was fighters that bet on themselves. Why? Because, it's a chance to really double your money, or make more money. They bet on themselves. They bet they'd ask their opponent to put up their side of the purse as a as a bet. So you bet your purse, I bet my purse, like kind of like double or nothing, winner take all kind of odds. All this stuff is documented. All the while, gambling is illegal, right? So now, fast forward to other experiences. I could tell you again, in the Abu Dhabi tournament, when we were in Abu Dhabi, which now, the tournament has not returned to Abu Dhabi in 2 decades, more than 2 decades. But several events were done in Abu Dhabi. and the fighters that went to those, no, no, no fighters made more money in Abu Dhabi than the guys who did the first tournament, probably. And that's because the aristocracy there has enough money, and the rich people there have enough money that they were throwing it around. They love the access to the fighters for the first time. They gave
Do you really
Sperry
think that? You think that they made more the first time?
the fighters.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I can give you the example of what's his name, Roger Neff. Okay, Roger Neff is with all due respect, because I believe he's deceased, and with all due respect, Roger was um an unbelievable physical specimen, a guy that walks in the room, 6'3", 260, with a six pack. Um, Not phenomenal grappler, but enough of a physical specimen when you're trying to fill a 16-man bracket 2 decades ago in the heavyweight division. Roger Neff had a call to ADCC. And I can tell you, and there are stories of WWE wrestlers going to Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia and these types of places where the people are impressed there by physical specimens. They had the house fighter in the first year of Abu Dhabi, a guy who was living in Abu Dhabi and was put into the tournament. Again, turned out to not be a super elite all-time great, but you remember Ricardo Morai? They called him the mutant. Renzo Gracie's student. The guy's probably 6'6", 280, also ripped. Um, Scary individual, right? And that's who they had working and living there and paying for every expense and things. How do I know they made more money? Because, like, for example, there's rumors and stories that you hear, like Mark Kerr got taken on shopping sprees of $30,000-$40,000 in clothes and stuff like that. Enzo Gracie woke up one morning and had a $100,000 BMW at his front doorstep because of a comment he had made back in Abu Dhabi about how nice that car looked in front of one of the sheiks. These guys were the well-regarded guys. Roger Neff was given $30,000 in cash to wear a shirt with a flamingo on it for a perfume company that one of the sheiks was trying to launch a perfume company of some kind, or maybe it was just something made up for the event. But he was given $30,000 to wear one particular guy's shirt, like that was the guy he was backing. That guy maybe didn't know all that much about grappling, but chose Roger mainly because he was an impressive person.
Yeah, I
So
remember that. Bruce Buffer used to say so and so representing such and such, and it wasn't a gym. It was
right,
something I had never heard of, you know?
right, and in general, some people there were this. Bruce is another guy that I know Bruce pretty well. Um, Bruce might be hurt by some of my comments, but he has his moments where he's impressive. I know, like, for example, boxing wise or whatever, Bruce, even now, I'm probably 10, 12 years younger than him, but he would probably kick my ass. So it's not about that. Bruce has had his impressive moments and not impressive moments, and Abu Dhabi wasn't one of his impressive moments. Um, there was on a side note, there was the bracket in the old days. They had a bracket that was printed at the last moment with stickers that you could follow along in the tournament and stuff. And one of those books had Renzo Gracie's team, Matt Serra. You can hear the announcement still on the Matt Serra fights on the internet, where um, the Renzo Gracie Academy was cut off. And Bruce was so accustomed to just reading what's in front of him that he literally was announcing over the microphone Renzo Gracie Aka, because he couldn't put two and two together and figure out that it was Academy. So what is Renzo Gracie Aka? But so anyway, funny. And but Bruce is another guy. He would tell me, because I had more access than him, and I never had access to the real players. They had Guy Nevens, who I'm sure is very wealthy, but Guy Nevens was the organizer that I had access to. And then the Sheiks, I talked on one occasion to Sheikh Taknoon, right? So with all due respect, um, Or Bruce would say to me, let him know I like a blue Rolex. Let him know I like a blue Rolex. I mean, he must have mentioned it a dozen times. So they would give gifts like this away. Um, I
Isn't this
witnessed
crazy? This is a crazy statement for people listening to this. To hear Miguel just say something. He had more access than Bruce Buffer. You know who
yeah,
Bruce Buffer is now. People watching this
Bruce
for the
was
first time may not be familiar with Miguel, but at that time he had more access than Bruce Buffer
Bruce
at
Bruce
ADCC.
Bruce Bruce kind of begged me to have that gig. I mean, in that position, Abu Dhabi gave me a lot of credence there, and I'm grateful to them because a lot of where I went in the sport, and it lasted till about 2007, 2008, but a lot of that trajectory was because of the trust they had in me, and I believe I performed and got their tournament off the ground. And their tournament would not be where it is today without me. But um, that's neither here nor there. I am grateful to them, and I'm not speaking bad about them. They can do whatever they want in their own country, but it was pretty clear that the sheiks were gambling in the stands on my guy bet your guy, and when the guy would win, the elation of one guy and the sadness of the other guys, you can see all of that activity. So gambling has never disappeared from any of the sports. Here I've given you a brief picking the spots of 300-400 years of gamblers being involved in the sport. Even in this century, um, around the Manny Pacquiao fights, um, you couldn't get into the um, Freddie Roach's gym just like as a fan. It's like, hey, you show up with a camera. It's like, hey, I want to watch Manny Pacquiao work out. No way. But if you see video, you see there are certain unexplained people standing around and who have access. Vegas people, betting people, people with money, people who are known in the business, etc., etc. People who are out there getting information out to other bettors. Plants. You know, Manny never worked out to a completely empty gym, but that's what they would have you think because nobody's allowed in the gym. I beg to differ. I think there were people like that were allowed in the gym. MMA had one of those types of people. In the early days, is a guy named Al Stanky. He was a crossover from boxing's world, and he was known as uh, I don't know if he trained Tank. I know him and Tank
He trained
almost,
Belfort. I know Belfort had mentioned
well,
him.
yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is he was a Vitor Belfort trainer, and I think around the time of, I think he had trained Tank at some point, and Tank was hurt because Tank actually around the time that famous brawl that happened post UFC fight, the Tank initiated it at the post fight party with Waleed Ismail and Vitor's team. Al Stanky was involved in that. And I believe Tank was upset with Al Stanky about having crossed over and gone to Vitor Bell and helped Vitor Belfort and stuff. That was at least part of the story around that, and that was when Vitor beat the tar out of Tank in the UFC. Um, so yeah, but Al's one of those guys that's a boxing insider, or was one of those guys that was a boxing insider. Um, the gambling people are there. The gambling people have a way of betting on the inside and staying on the inside. Um, and in this sport, in MMA, like these guys that are in trouble now, they're probably making $10,000 or $20,000 to fight. And as I mentioned, 75,000 bucks is what you usually hear. Dana starts off at blackjack, and he's lost $5 million in a night, and this, that, and the other stuff. When you hear that, and you're one of these guys that has spent a 6 week training camp, and you get $10,000 at the end of it, where you got to give 20% to your trainer and 30% to um uh the IRS and those supplements and this and that and the other thing, you have no money left. So I, I I think it's very easy for these guys to find um in a pool of 600 or 800 fighters. I'm sure most of them would be enough clever enough to stay away from this. But some may be naive enough to think they won't get caught, or naive enough to think that this is okay, or or just don't care because they have to make some money. Again, the guy from Fight Society mentioned it a few times, where they're trying to feed their kids. So somewhere in the last 15 years or so, gambling became legal in the U.S. And that only really serves to make the problem worse. Around the time of the NBA scandal in the last month or so, a couple of guys that were, um, Italian mob family members came out and explained. I'll get you the guy's name there, but he explained how the mob actually makes more money when it's legal than when it's not legal, especially because what happens is, you know, if the sport books or whatever are going to like not take action, or not, have some limits, or not pay well, or do anything like that, what that does is it drives the gambler to the bookies. And the, you know, by making it legal, they opened it up to average Americans putting, betting on credit cards and stuff like that. And it just blew up the sport. So now there is big money around it. So it doesn't surprise me that, um, yeah, and do the sport books know? The sport books absolutely know. The monitoring systems of guy, they have departments. The big ones have departments. The smaller ones or medium ones have a guy. But like I said, some of these guys understand the numbers in a mathematical way that your average show doesn't. And they have a guy that's looking and saying, these bets here are funny. And again, I've been around sport guys, sport book betting guys, where I was actually working, at some point on customer service for sports books. I've had guys call in and be like, I'm cashing out. The sport book goes, no, you're not. We're not giving you your money. You know what I mean? And it's because, you know, I remember, I don't even remember details, but I remember a guy who made a lot of money on South Korean baseball. It's like, how does an American, or it wasn't even an American, it was a European. How does a European woman follow South Korean baseball? But somebody was feeding her some information, and she was trying to cash out a considerable amount of money, and she just didn't get it from the sport book. We had bomb threats. We had guys, threaten, you're not going to pay me. Where'd you get your information? I don't like your bets. We're going to ban you. What they will do is they'll take you and be like, okay, I don't like your betting style. You're a pro. That's what they look for. The sport books will tell you, you're a professional gambler. We're going to give you a $50 limit. That's it. You want to gamble on $50. It's not worth their time. So if they mark you as a pro, that's a big deal.
But
And
if they had made money through the book, like you had mentioned, where they took their bets, why not give them their money if you're going to take their bet?
because you think that they're privy to inside information, and just like stocks, you're not allowed to have inside information. Bookkeepers don't want you having inside information. If you knew this guy was going to lie
Right.
down because he told you, and you go and bet at the book, and the book is going to be, they're shuffling money and stuff, and they're probably not coming out of pocket with it. But if they do take a big hit, they will have to make a big payout. And again, it's all a business, right? So the sport books and the casinos themselves only really have a certain amount of cash. Like, I mean, the big Vegas casinos obviously can handle even $1 million bets and things like that. If they lose, they'll be able to pay out them. But there is a limit to the amount of cash they have on hand. So it's like, if all of a sudden huge bets come in for a medium-sized sport book out of Costa Rica 15 years ago, and you have to pay out, a couple $100,000 in a week, that's going to affect your ability to pay out their customers that are making, I want to get my $150 I made on roulette and crap like that. It's like, well, I got to delay them a couple couple of days. And people don't like delays. People don't like customer service. These companies, especially at the time, operate on customer service. It's like, how fast do you pay out? And like I said, I've been uh one of the groups um had to that I was working with. We were also doing MMA shows with in Costa Rica, and I was in the States, and they needed to buy equipment. So one day I went down to the local Amish restaurant in central Pennsylvania, Boondocks, and a guy with a long coat showed up, no name, no nothing, said, "Hey, are you Miguel?" Hands me an envelope with $15,000 and walks out the door. And those infrastructures occur. They exist. The bookkeepers have people in big cities on hand with money um, that are there to pay you out in cash. And so like with all the infrastructure and all the type of things that go on there, that was just to get some camera equipment, right? But like to pay a bettor who's going to maybe take his action to somebody else, and now you pay them. Now the whole game is you got to get your money back. You want them to stay, right? That's obviously kind of obviously well known, right? So I can tell you a story without mentioning any names, but this guy never made the UFC, but his brother was a well-known superstar in the UFC. Um, and the sport book I was working with was using him to make payouts. They gave him a little bit of money, you know, and he would receive a few $1,000s, and he would be the person that delivers the money to the guy who won the bet. And he screwed up. He was about to be on about $1,000 a week salary to be on call to make payments in a major city. So that again, now you're talking about guys who are going to make $1,000 a week, whether they work or not, to be on call, because if somebody wins money, it's pressure for the sport book to pay them out. So you got to get them their money right away. So somebody shows up, delivers gave him $30,000, and if he had made that delivery, he would have had his $1,000 a week salary, but he opted to do the shady thing and take the money from him. And that's where legs get broken. In this particular case, that's not the way it was resolved, but um, that happened. That
Whose
happened.
whose brother was that? I'm trying to figure it
I,
out in my head.
I'll tell you offline. I'd rather not tell somebody, online here, because I obviously that's 20-year-old information, but you don't need somebody badmouth now. And obviously, the guy's brother was not, who was a UFC star. I mean, I'm talking about star that everybody from a certain era will definitely know and loved watching fight. Um, and his brother was a more or less an average fighter. Um, but yeah, you don't need any of those guys getting a phone call and asking them about stuff 20 years ago just to dredge things up. But the reason I bring up the example is to show you how pervasive real gambling is in the sports already. So here is a situation where that guy now because he took money from the sport book. The sport book, you know, some sport books opt to send ugly Ukrainian guys to beat people up. You know what I mean? Um, in this case, it got worked out, but how do you know it didn't get worked out by him having faked fights, or by maybe his brother being asked to do something he doesn't want to do in a UFC fight? That's not how this was resolved, but now you start to see the tentacles of how these companies are already there. They're already there. They've been there for decades. And again, Dana is a casino person. At the end of the day, Dana was a son of the Fertitas. Dana, to my knowledge, Dana doesn't come from money himself. He made his money because he was associated with the Fertitas, and the Fertitas were always this type of person: casino, bookkeeper, house, money type people, people that understand the odds and people that understand the money. in a different way than the average Joe comes into the casino with $400 that he's going to gamble. And if he wins, great. And if he loses it, he has to stop because it's his rent for the next week. They count on people like that to just leave their money there. So, yeah, I'm not surprised that there may be people out there asking for favors, asking for inside information, and that at some point that escalates to the point where, you know, fighters and a guy like Kraus, I present to you, is probably one of those guys that has that mathematical instinct. I'll give you the example I gave you offline, and this comes from one of the owners of a sports book I worked for. So you have 365 days in a year. If you start polling people on the street, when's your birthday? Not the year, just the date. August 1st, August 5th, da da da. And you start writing it down. 365 days. Random people, ask different people every time. 4 out of 5 times you will repeat somebody with the same birthday before you hit 33 requests. 4 out of 5 times. In my head, he was like, yeah, that's logical. You know what I mean? And I present to you that maybe everybody thinks, okay, that's cool. I understand that. It doesn't, I had to see it to believe it. We worked at an active office, started writing it down, and sure enough, every time, duplicate, duplicate, duplicate. That's the odds that some people understand instinctually that I had to see it, and I still sort of feel like it's kind of unbelievable. It's like the coin flip. How many times is it in a row can the coin land heads, right? Before it lands tails. So those types of odd people, and I think Kraus is probably one of those guys that understands it that way. That's my take on it. And if that's the case, then it becomes really alluring, really hard to stay away from. So the lifetime ban and all that probably has no real effect on him. He's still out there gambling. He could have his cousin, his neighbor, anyone like that opening accounts, giving them info. He takes a percentage of the money. I think in the old days he actually had like one of these websites where like you have a community and you would give out bet information and he takes back a tip. So you have a network of 300 people listening to you that are all kicking back money. Now you're making money. And I'm not saying that that's what Kraus is still doing, but again, I suspect that he's one of those guys with the mathematical brain that I just don't have.
Do you
And
think he would risk it though? Because it seems like he at least got off on this last one. We haven't heard of him going to prison or anything.
oh,
You
of
know,
course,
he did
it
get
does
banned
seem
from the sport that was making him money. That's not a non-punishment by any means.
and
But
then
he
he had a
didn't go to
major
prison.
and then he had a major like little media like while he still had some credence on social media and some sort of presence, it came out that he was in real estate. Remember,
Right.
he was doing real estate and that he didn't need the gambling anymore.
Real
Like I
estate's
said,
not doing good in the U.S., so I don't buy that.
well, and not even, especially, it hasn't gotten any better either. But the point is, maybe there is some way where he's figured out a system of, you know, like there are a lot of people that, look for foreclosed homes and will
Hmm.
buy homes on pennies on the dollar and stuff. There are ways to make money in real estate. You have to have money to make money. Um, but again, I think that gambling and being an insider on the sport has an addictive allure and a buzz and an insider feel that is maybe like an addiction. It's hard to cold turkey on it.
Do you think maybe you're not saying he is, but you wouldn't be shocked if he was?
Absolutely. I wouldn't be shocked if he was. I wouldn't be shocked if um there were a couple of dozen people that do the same thing.
And the reason we bring this up, we didn't mention this already, but the fighter in question, Isaac uh, let me get his last name right here. Um, he was one of James Krause's former fighters. Now he trains in Colorado, which is where a lot of them went after everything went down. Isaac Dulgarian. A lot of these fighters went to this Factory X Muay Thai in Colorado once Krause's gym went under or had to go under, forced to go under,
Again,
forced to sell off.
it could be all on the up and up. It could be,
But it is an
but
interesting coincidence.
right, right. You know, if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, it might be a duck.
Right. And there was
Uh,
another fight on the card, I think, that Fight Society mentioned. I think it was on the
I,
prelims.
and I saw one article that said that the UFC has come on the radar with almost 100 fights um, that have some type of suspicious activity in terms of betting in the last whatever period of time since 2022 or maybe this year or whatever it is, but that the FBI's radar is up, and again,
Like
you just
Fight
have to.
Society mentioned the main event. He said David Onama was just basically a punching bag from the time the bell rang to when it was over, which had ended in the first round.
Mhm.
And he thought that looked a little suspect because he just
Yeah,
never did anything. He mounted zero offense.
I would stay out as a commentator and even as a person that is responsible for being in the business and stuff. I would stay out of speculation as to because you never know what happens going into a fight. I've seen fighters. Um, Hector Lombard's a good example. Hector Lombard got a tremendous contract from the UFC on a huge winning streak, looked unstoppable, and goes in and drops his first UFC fight. Is that a gambling thing?
No.
No. In this particular case, it was um, that he was really carrying baggage from. He's kind of a little bit of a loose cannon, right? And he's carrying baggage from a toxic relationship with a woman who was in his head, kind of thing. So you never really. I wouldn't get into speculation onto you know uh, individual fights unless you actually know what the odds were when the money came in and have evidence, at least that circumstantial evidence, to guide you in that direction. Because
But he
anything
did
can
mention
happen in the fight
Onama
ring.
also has ties to Kraus. And,
Right,
this
right.
fight
But
that
again,
looked very suspect,
but
you know.
that doesn't take away the fact that he might have been driving to the arena from the hotel on his
Yeah,
own and gotten into a car accident, and
right.
that screwed him up in his head. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
again, without the additional evidence of money coming in an odd way or in an accelerated way in a short period of time as the fight approaches, without that type of evidence, I would hesitate to speculate because we've seen a lot of strange things in the fight game.
And
But
it's
the
hard.
FBI, when the books in the FBI now, because they're legal, the FBI has somewhere where they can go and look for evidence. When we were operating in Costa Rica, those people in the U.S. that gambled with our sports books were technically breaking the law, and also I guess our owners were technically, you know, being looked for by the FBI and stuff because of taxes and things like that. Um, but so they really had no one to. It's not like they could report, hey, like these odds or these fighters or there seems to be a network here, and that's what I think this fight coming up, and then hearing that there may have been 100 or so fights that have been on the radar is, yeah, there are anomalies. What is being revealed here is patterns. That there is a pattern of fights that fall into the radar of the FBI, and their guidelines are a certain amount of money that changes the odds by a certain amount in a short period of time near the fight.
Right.
When that starts to happen over and over and over again, then you start to ask questions. These guys, these guys are all from the same gym. These guys are all from the same area. These guys are all, what's the relations, right? These guys are all managed by the same guy. These guys are all et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the evidence that is required before you make accusations. Because again, the fight game is weird enough that, you know, yeah.
And MMA is a
I
hard thing to police. I think anybody who's trained a long time, whether it's just jujitsu or multiple arts, especially in grappling, it's real easy to let a guy beat you. If you
yeah,
train long enough, you know the positions well enough. The guy could have no knowledge that that's what you're doing, and you
exactly.
could
That's
you
the
could
other part of
easily
it.
let somebody beat you because in jujitsu it's the movement of your elbow this much, or
Yeah, with
your neck
with
pops
zero,
up this much. Yeah, it's stuff no
not
one could
talking
see.
about betting, not
Yeah,
talking about betting, not talking about anything like that. The idea of working a fight
right.
and how you work a fight. The promoter, you know, I as a promoter could go up to a fighter and say, I want you to lose to this guy because I really think he has potential, but we need to get him a couple of wins and get his train rolling. You know, you try to avoid things like that, but if that were to happen, there's no gambling involved, there's no signs involved, but you've made a personal request, and that
Hmm.
fighter can decide how they do that. Um, yeah, I, you know, I'll tell, I don't care anymore. When we did shows in Russia, um, my Russian boss was asking for Oleg Taktarov to do a main event. And Oleg was obviously older and beyond his career and stuff. And when I approached him, Oleg said he would do it um, on the condition that he can pick his opponent. And if you look at it, and I talked to his opponent was John Marsh. I talked to him and I basically said, it's out of my hands. It's in Russia. I'm being asked to do this. It's not what I want to do, but you guys figure out. And they trained together. They knew each other very well. And the fight, to somebody who kind of has inside knowledge or whatever, even now, if you look at it, with this knowledge, you might say yeah, it looks pretty cheesy, but to an average person there, nobody claimed it was a work. Nobody's ever said that fight was a work, except that I know. You know what I mean? And again, that fight, maybe there was gambling involved in Russia on it or whatever, but Oleg was going to be a very heavy favorite anyway to win in Russia, so I don't think gambling had any effect on them. But the idea was in front of the Russian crowd, the Russian promoter wanted the Russian to win.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, you're absolutely right. You never know if there's can be an agreement with the fighters. It's like, hey, you got a chance at a payday. John Marshall took his payday. He wasn't worried about his record at that point. He's like, I can't take a loss. My honor. I don't want to do that. He said, yeah, Oleg, I'm not going to get hurt. I'll take a payday. And yeah, it just is a black mark on my record. Oleg gets to, you know, hear the cheers of the Russian crowd for the last time.
Yeah. It would be wild if they drug out some of the old names from this past scandal. That would be crazy. But not necessarily surprising when you think about it. Like we're saying, like maybe if one of those guys wasn't doing as well now, in this case, Kraus, and I'm not accusing him of it by any means.
That
We
doesn't even
actually
matter though.
defended him when it happened. You know,
That doesn't
um,
even matter though, because
yeah,
even if he was making $1 million, everybody who's made $1 million wants 2 million.
yeah, that is true. You're right. You're right. But there have been a report that he was like 5 million in debt or something.
Yeah, that becomes a Terry Rozier thing, which is
Yeah.
the basketball situation where he's making a $24 million salary, but owes 8 million or something to the FBI for back taxes, and is not in great financial shape. Has not handled his money well, and that's one of the reasons why you become susceptible to doing the types of things that could be being done there.
Yeah, you would think the average person like me, I would think, okay, you dodged a bullet once, why would you do it again? But
Yeah,
like you're saying, sometimes it
it,
doesn't
it, it
matter.
yeah, and especially I think you also in the Kraus situation again, without saying he's doing anything, why would he? He paid no consequences, really. You know,
Yeah.
he wasn't going to be a UFC champion. He was a good fighter. He was a good little fighter. But he was already starting to make more money on other things and already looking to expand his career and stuff. Why? Because the money from the at the end of the day, one of the core problems is that the fighters really don't make enough money. So many of them would consider this as opposed to many of them would that they're it's foolproof because they've already got their income so locked up that they don't have to worry about it. Most of these guys live fight to fight, anything like an injury or even taking a look again. Oh, what was the name of the kid? Gray Maynard. Okay,
Hmm.
Gray Maynard was on the cusp of being a UFC champion. And one of the toughest guys, also one of the hardest working guys, and a good guy, right? So he has nothing, no gambling allegations there at all. But he talked about taking that loss to Frankie Edgar, and in the whole build-up to the fight, he was making 40 and 40, say, or whatever the money was. So in his head, he's cashing in 80,000, and that's his. He spent 2 months thinking, I'm going to win. I'll have 80,000, this, that, and the other thing. And then all of a sudden, part of the drop after taking a loss that, why are the guys down? Sure, taking a loss is brutal. But on top of that is the harsh reality that you've just made half your money. Now, the UFC could solve this problem instantly. The bottom line is you should get, and I experimented with this. I didn't last enough time in the business to effectuate it, but I think the contract should be you get X amount to fight, and you get a programmed, not a Dana White initiated, I liked it bonus. You get a program bonus to finish the fight. So, in other words, if you win a decision, you've got your fight money, and the lost person has his fight money. So that way, nobody's getting half the money in their head. There's not that structure of I win something or I get half. And that message with people because almost every top shelf fighter is going to have to count on I'm going to win. I'm going to win. I'm going to win. That's part of the mentality of the top shelf guys. So, but part of that, the part that's unwritten, the part that nobody thinks about or tells you about, is that means that they're counting post fight on having double the money that when they take the loss that they have. So now all of a sudden it's like shit. I was counting on having 100,000 and buying my daughter a used car for college, and now I can't. And that's why is the crash so bad? Yeah, you take a loss, the ego's bad. Like the Blue Jays are probably licking their wounds right now. Those guys all have good money and they're not worried about this type of problem and stuff like that. They don't have half the money coming in. The Blue Jays are licking their their wounds right now because they're taking that loss in there. But on top of that, add to the fact that you just made half the money that you were thinking that you were going to make for the last few months. So the structure of the UFC's uh, contracts could be fixed instantly with here, you get 100,000 for the fight, you get 80,000 for the fight. Should either of you finish, you got 50,000 on top of it. If you don't finish, you got your 100, you got your 80. That way it's not 10 and 10. Both make 20 and 20 at the minimum or whatever. So that way they can count on their 20 grand. But you need to be able to count on a fixed amount that doesn't get chopped in half because of something. How do you think Tim Kennedy felt when Tim Kennedy knocked Yoel Romero out, had some shenanigans go on in Romero's corner, the fight goes on, and then he gets knocked out. He left the UFC again. He talks about leaving the UFC because it broke his heart, and he was on the cut. It would have been a championship fight for him next, and et cetera, et cetera. But on top of all that, he just made half the money. So it's a huge. The UFC's contracts that have been in place for decades now are a joke, and they could easily fix that, but they choose not to because, yeah, you can play around with that. Thankfully, there are not as many draws in the sport as you think. But the bottom line is you know, do you pay the win money for draws? Sometimes, if the fighters performed or whatever, maybe you pay both. Dana, if they don't make a lot of money, Dana, might take the PR move and say, we'll pay them both their win money. But at the end of the day, they're not contractually obligated. They can pay neither their win money, and the company saves money, and that's more money in Dana's pocket.
Now, apparently, the FBI has flagged 100 fights for, betting irregularities. And
Mm-hmm.
apparently, this fight, they warned them at least about 2 hours. They gave them 2 hours to pull the fight, and the UFC chose not to do it. So, what do you make with that information?
Hard to say, hard to say. Is it the UFC being arrogant? Is it the UFC knowing that at the end of the day they're not involved, so there's little consequence for them? Um, you know, the and again, Fight Society touched on the idea here that a fighter very well may go to jail or may at least have to deal with the walk of shame of getting arrested and being handcuffed and taken in and interviewed and stuff like that. None of which is cool. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, the FBI may or the UFC may have made an assessment that, well, uh, we don't know anything about it. We don't have anything to do with it. Our matchmakers, or obviously, are not involved in the conspiracy of making the fight. So, at the end of the day, we have no liability. So we'll just go forward with it. They probably should have canceled the fight because it was a low-level fight, and it would have avoided them some bad perception. But they may also know that there are 100 fights that they've been notified about in the last little bit of time, or that they have been looked at and flagged and things like that, that are maybe investigated. So they may have just said, "What's one more?"
You know, I wouldn't say necessarily it was a low level fight. I mean, he was 7-1 going into this fight, and
Yeah,
chose to tack another loss onto his
but was it
career.
on?
That's
Was it
kind of
on
a
the?
turning point.
Was it on the main card?
Yeah.
Okay, so if it was a main card fight, then I mean, you could always cancel a main card fight and elevate one of the undercard. The undercard typically, the way I
Maybe
see
that's
UFC,
why he did it. Maybe he thought, okay, I'm 7-1. Most people wouldn't expect me to do it here. This is where I'll do it.
yeah,
Because my
who
career's
knows,
going well. You know what I mean?
who
If
know,
I went
and
now
who
I'm
knows
81,
what
I
is,
don't. Yeah,
who knows what the benefit of doing it was.
yeah. But I mean, that would be a good place to do it in a place where you wouldn't necessarily expect it. A guy who's not doing well, like Minner, when it happened, that's more logical. A guy who's doing well, you wouldn't think
Yeah,
he'd want to take a loss, so you might overlook it.
yeah, but even here, and this is again, this touches back on the same original subject of the UFC's pay structure. A guy 7-1 on a positive trajectory is still playing a lottery ticket, like to make real money. Like he may wind up like a Gray Maynard guy who topped off at making about $40,000, $80,000 for a couple of fights, which is good. It's nice money. Make that twice a year, you're in the mid $150,000 range. But that's you know a upper middle class salary for an American who's making it every year consistently. Not who's going to drop off and has a window of 2 or 3 years where he's making that, and then building up to it, he was making crap money, and then the dive down, he maybe grabs a couple of paydays here or there, maybe post UFC, somebody overpays him and stuff like that, but then it's over. They don't have the chance of making 150, then next year 162, 170, 173 as you get raises. Let's say a Citibank job or something like that until you're 50. So your best, in general, in corporate America, probably 50 to 60 are your best earning years, right? 40 to 60, right in that range, right after fighters are
If they don't
done
find a
with their
reason to
career.
fire you, yeah,
Right.
because you're
But
making
that's
too
what.
much.
And why does corporate America do these restructures and firings and stuff? Because that's where the money is, and it comes with the consistency, and that's what the fighters never get. So again, like Gray Maynard, nobody here would say $30,000 is crap money, like not your average listener or anything like that. That's good money. But again, what's next? What's next? What's next? The fighters can't answer what's next. So to break into the John Jones money, or even I bet you Daniel Cormier is in the long run going to make a lot more money off of being an announcer. Bisping is going to make a lot more money off of being an announcer than they made in the ring. So you try to parlay your career into something, but not everybody gets to be Michael Bisping or Daniel Cormier or some of the announcers. We could also make a long list of guys that went down that path, appeared behind the mic, and then disappeared. Whatever happened to Frank Mir's, announcing career? I thought he was pretty good. Like, maybe not bombastic, but I think Mir has a very good fight insight, right? But he didn't last long behind the mic for whatever reason, and sometimes that comes down to if you look back at the history of the UFC after Blatnick and in that era, at the beginning of the Zuffa era, Jeff Osborne was a UFC announcer on the pay-per-views, and at the end of the day, and I'm sure there's more to it, but at the end of the day, there was something about him and his style, maybe his delivery or whatever, that didn't strike well with some of the execs in Zuffa. And they went out and got somebody else, i.e. Joe Rogan, right? So, as much as, Joe's funny because Joe's in the kind of a little bit of a hot seat today. I think in the last couple of days, Ronda Rousey has come out and crapped on him for never having fought or whatever.
Yeah, what a
He,
joke.
but
Ronda, I
but
think, is a little bit delusional about her place in history.
yeah, Ronda's a little bitter still, I think, and yeah, and maybe she has some PTSD after getting punched and kicked in the head so hard in the last couple of fights. No,
One thing I
she
talk about is she
but
left.
my point was
Yeah.
I would put as much as Joe, and I respect Joe Rogan's knowledge about fights, and I know that he's gone on to get his black belt and study with Eddie Bravo. And I actually, here's a funny story. When Eddie Bravo beat Hoyler Gracie, Eddie and Joe Rogan and myself and a couple of other people were the afterfight party. So I got to be part of the afterfight party. So I know Joe, like Joe doesn't know or care about me anymore ever, But I have that experience with Joe, and I know Joe's a tough guy, and he's fit and and he's done great in his business and stuff. But Ronda's knock on him is he doesn't fight. But I would still put Jeff Osborne's fight knowledge above Joe's.
I'm not even concerned about Joe. What I'm saying is Ronda's a little delusional about her place. And
No, no,
one
no.
thing, one thing that
But
recently happened that I think people don't think about, and I mentioned this a couple times. Ronda Rousey had like 12 fights before she faced Holly Holm and Nunez. Okay? And as
okay,
soon as she lost those fights, she bailed. Liz Carmouche, who she beat like 12 years ago, just won a belt in a PFL
yeah,
tournament because she
that's a
stuck
real
with it.
fighter.
She
Yeah,
stuck with it. Ronda Rousey, the first time she faced some adversity, she turned and left the sport and blamed the
right.
sport for it. Not herself. She blamed the sport for it. Liz
And
Carmouche stuck
yeah,
around and got
a lot of
better and
people do.
won.
That's the Ronda trick. My point was that I would still take Jeff Osborne's knowledge over Joe Rogan,
Oh
but
yeah. Oh yeah.
Jeff is not there because of what somebody likes. One of the executives, one of the high end people, the aristocracy, as we've been referring to him. He just didn't sit well with them, and he was gone. So that's kind of how it works. Is that there are a lot of power players. Part of those power players are involved in gambling. Gambling people know how to get those people's attention, how to maybe soothe their egos or work with their egos, or just bottom line is get on the inside somehow. And that's it, is that gambling is an insider's game in these sports, and it always has been. Nobody makes a fortune. Again, the sport books flag a guy they suspect is a professional gambler. You're a pro. You don't get to gamble with us. The casinos ban people. Dana's been banned from casinos. Why? Because at the end of the day, he's been labeled a pro gambler. He knows what he's doing at the tables. So he takes them. They're only going to accept that so many times before they tell him, you know what? You're not welcome here anymore. And those guys are a circle of people. Those guys are people that support each other and look out for each other. And we'll see if the FBI can crack that or if it just, what I suspect will happen is a couple of people will go down and then things will maybe settle down for a little bit and then it'll be business as usual.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, it'll be interesting to see if more comes of it than last time. You know, because everyone thought a lot was going to come from it last time.
Yeah,
You
like
know,
if Krause, I don't think Krause even did the walk of shame, right? He was
right?
never put in handcuffs and arrested and stuff like that. So I suspect that that's going to happen in one of these cases. That the current FBI is a little more aggressive, a little more, um, aware of social media and the sound bites and things like that, and they will try to send a message there. But like I suspect, at the end of the day, they turn the lights on, the cockroaches will all hide, and it'll be business as usual within a year to 18 months.
But it'll be interesting to see because who's the FBI is President Trump. And apparently he's getting ready to have a UFC event at the White House in a few months. If
Right.
it if it even happens. He's tied with the UFC. He's very close with them. So it'll be interesting to see how they
He is
handle
close,
this.
but Trump, I think Trump is a guy that um if I were him with his savvy, I would say now I'm done. We're not doing this. And I would if now you've run into my FBI and I gotta protect my FBI. That would be the smart thing for him to do. You know, I don't know if this becomes small potatoes and it's not a big deal, then they could do the event. And by next year, when they do the event, that's when the cockroaches will be coming back out again in the dark. Um, we'll see how fast they move. We'll see how here's the Mystic Miguel call. The Mystic Miguel call is that maybe there'll be more consequences in the James Krause situation, but it'll be business as usual shortly.
Yeah, it's fascinating. That like you said, to back your own FBI would be kind of like the common sense, maybe even brave thing to do given the circumstance they're in. Oh, I wouldn't say brave because Trump could can the UFC anytime he wants, and it wouldn't be a big deal.
Yeah,
But
they don't really have an effect on him. Being
but he is
associated with
close
him
with
is
them. He is
yeah. Being
close with them.
I think I
And
think I think being close with him made him look cool, maybe to a younger audience and things like that. But I think being associated with Trump has been much more beneficial to the UFC than being associated with the UFC has been beneficial to Trump.
and also I think in a way it might even give him some good PR if he said, "Look, no, I can't do this anymore. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to back my FBI." I think that would go over well with people rather than
Yeah,
not.
I think especially when you consider the problems he's having where with Epstein and the files and things like that,
Hmm.
he this could almost fall under that category if he lets them get away with it or has some role in minimizing this and doesn't just let the FBI do their job. So I think that's what's going to happen. I think that's what's going to happen is Trump is going to say the FBI is doing their job and whatever happens happens. And you know, Dana doesn't know Cash Patel. Cash Patel can take this in the direction he wants. And I think, if they're on the up and up, they do have a major gambling problem across sports in America. There is illegal money moving back and forth, and there's a mountain, not a molehill, for them to look into. Is my opinion. Like I said, I suspect that some people will go down, but it'll be business as usual shortly.
And if anything, there's more gambling
In
around
the
now than
NBA
there.
also. In the
Yeah,
NBA
and
also.
there's more gambling around now than ever before. I mean, everyone's got a
Absolutely.
gambling sponsor. Everyone's in bed with gambling.
They made it
Yeah,
legal.
everybody.
They made it legal. So of course it's become mainstream now where it's no longer, making a phone call to a bookie, or I don't know if you're like in high school, there would be like the one shady guy who would come around with like the football, like, pick all the football this weekend, and if you get 7 out of 8, you win some money and stuff, and he'd collect the money, and who did he take it back to?
Nobody.
Yeah, no, he took it back to a bookkeeper, yeah, or
Mhm.
some kind of bookie that was
You think
making
that?
money, and I don't think I ever want, because they would sucker you into putting down $10 or something, and you got to pick 9 of 10 winners or 8 of 10 winners.
Yeah.
And for a guy without inside information, a high school kid or whatever, never won. I never
We
won. I was just basically giving them money away, right?
One of the jobs I had in Hawaii, we had some Filipino workers, and they had their parlay sheet that they would bring around, and everyone would, the pot would be X amount, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, gambling. I think the one thing we've talked about with this podcast is that gambling is as old as the sports. In boxing, we trace it back to the very beginning. In these sports, um, you know, when the illegal sport books started to take action, and Nick and Joey Odessa and guys like that started to come up, it was a big deal. It was seen by many people as another step towards the mainstream, and as that we can gamble on the sport. So people were looking for it. People were taking bets on the sport at home. Hey, I'll bet you this, with their friends and stuff since the very beginning of the sport. You know, if you were a guy in California who took 3 classes with Hoist Gracie, and you could sucker a few friends into watching the sport, a guy like Chris Brennan, and I know Chris, and I'm not saying Chris would, is involved in gambling or anything like that, but and this is a total fictitious situation. Chris is one of the early people who knew Hoist Gracie personally, rolled with him, and understood jujitsu. If he could catch a handful of people who didn't know jujitsu, who wanted to bet on Harold Howard, or in somebody else, wanted to bet on Kevin Rozier or something like that, then he would have said, "I'll bet you all. I'll take $20 on everybody in this bar." And again, you didn't watch the sport in the bars there, so but it's a fictitious situation. But again, it's some inside information is all you need, and gambling starts.
All right. Fascinating stuff as always, Miguel. Be interested to see kind of how it plays out. We'll keep track of it.
All right,
And
brother. Good deal. Let's see. Let's get some action on this. On these comments, I'm willing to comment there, and if the Fight Society guys out there, um, come join us. We'll have some fun talking about the old days and fill you in a little bit.
yeah, I'll try to mention it too. Yeah, people that are watching this, you can follow Miguel on Instagram
No,
at M.
don't follow me. Just comment on these YouTube
Yeah,
videos.
yeah, yeah. You can
I'll
comment
be
on the
there.
videos if you want, and he'll be here to answer them. And like, subscribe if you learned anything. If you enjoy the channel, share it with somebody else. And as long as we appreciate people taking time to watch the episodes. And until the next episode, see ya.